So the final two animation editors I would like to show you are the Dopesheet and the Action editors. The good news is, because you already know how to use the timeline, you already know how to use both of these editors. In fact, the timeline is a simplified version of the Action editor. Or to think of it another way, the Dopesheet and the Action editors are beefed up versions of the timeline. So let's take a proper look. Firstly, where is the Dopesheet or the Action editor? Well, I'm just going to create a new window, just right click and horizontal split, just to drag that up there. And then we can actually change this one over to the Dopesheet. You can see that the hotkey is Shift F12. We also have the timeline, which is using the same hotkey there. But I'm just going to choose this, and now we have our Dopesheet open. Now with the Dopesheet / Action editor, we also have a lot of sub-editors. They're all classified under the same kind of menu. But the two ones that we'll be talking about today are the Dopesheet and the Action editor. These ones are kind of, they're outside the scope of what we're going to be talking about today. So the Dopesheet and the Action editor are almost identical. There's only one key difference, and that is with the Dopesheet, you get a summary of all of your characters' animation channels. I just collapsed them there so we can see both the multi-ball rig, which is our character here, and our stomp rig, which is our character over here. And if we had anything else animated, this would show up here as well. So that's what the Dopesheet is for. You get an overview of the entire animation that is in your file. Whereas if we switch to the Action editor, we only get access to the one character that we have selected. So if I select our multi-ball rig, this is our animation for our multi-ball rig. And if I select Stomp over here, well actually let's select his rig rather than the actual geometry. This is the animation action for this character displaying in our Action editor here. Now I'll just show you the main difference. Let's just say I wanted to select all of our animation. This is just Stomp running back and kicking the ball. What if I wanted to move him backwards in time? So I didn't want him to start at frame 1. Let's just say I want him to start at frame 10, or frame 11 in this case, so 10 frames later. So now we play our animation, we scrub forward, and you'll notice the ball flies off before we've even got there. So what we'd like to do is move those both together. That is where the Dopesheet would come in. So we get to see all of our animation data, and if we wanted to move it 10 frames forward in time, now when we scrub, you'll see that it stays in sync. So that is the difference between the Dopesheet and the Action editors. Now this editor has the same areas as our timeline down here. We can scrub in the top. This is our scrubbing bar, our timeline playhead area. And this is the main area. And over here on the left, we actually have our panels. We can collapse this if we want, and then we can actually just click this little arrow here that will shoot it out again. And here we have all our groups. So this is the summary. So this is a summary of all the keyframes on each frame for all of the actions that we have in our scene. If we twirl this down, you can see that this is the armature object, and this is the actual action that is attached to that object. Now, like before, if we don't want to see these colors, this is our color groups here. It's quite difficult to read that yellow. We can turn that off in the view menu. Let's just go View, turn off Show Color Groups, and then we get the default green, which is, in my opinion, much easier to read. And finally, down here, we have our Stomp rig character. So if you wanted to scrub, it's exactly the same as the timeline. If you have right-click select, you can just scrub in the top with the left mouse button, also in the main area with the left mouse button. But if you are using the left-click select, which is the default, then you have to hold down Shift and right-click to be able to scrub it just in that main area. But let's change it back to my preferred settings. And over here, we do have a sidebar. So if you press the N key, you get a sidebar here, but it's actually blank. And that's the same with our timeline here. You have this superfluous little window over there. So it's best just to keep that one closed. So here we are in the Action editor, and I'll just go over a few of the key differences from what you've learned already about our timeline down here. So firstly, you probably can see that some of these keyframes have got different shapes. I'll go over those different shapes and what they mean in a moment. But firstly, let's go over the majority of the actions that you'll be doing inside our Action editor or the Dopesheet. So firstly, you can select all your keys. It's exactly the same as the other one. You can move them around by hitting the G key. You can scale, I'll select them, just scale them from the point of view of the cursor, and you can also shrink and extend our keys here. We can also move our view around with the middle mouse button. If you get lost, just hit the home key and that's going to zoom to the area. You can also zoom with these little bars here You can set your start and your end frame with Control Home and Control End. It's the same as our timeline. And anything that you can do with the timeline, you can do in the Action Editor as well as the Dopesheet. But the advantage of both of these editors, the Action Editor and the Dopesheet, is you can actually twizzle down into the channels here. So now we have access to the individual keyframes. So this is just like our graph editor, except we don't have our handles and our curves getting in the way. So say if I wanted to delete a whole channel, I can actually just select our channel over here and then hit the delete key or the X key, and then I've deleted that, that Y location channel. Let me just undo that. So Control Z. We can move them up and down with the page up and page down. Sometimes you might want to change the order. So maybe you want the scales at the top. So you can select them and then just move all of our scale channels up to the top there. Now we can't actually hide any of our channels, but we can mute them with this button here. So let me just pick a control. So I'll jump into pose mode and let's just mute our head here. And then let's mute all of our location channels. So let's just hold down the left mouse button. And now when we scrub, you'll see our head's not actually moving at all because we have muted it. So let's unmute that. And now it's back to normal. So that's what that does. And if you don't want anything to change, you can just lock your channel there. Now, of course, if we do that on the master group channel, it's going to affect all of our channels inside that group. So over on this side, we have a couple buttons. You probably remember what they do. So this one will only show you the curves for what you have selected. At the moment, I don't have anything selected. So let me just select one bone there. And now we have our foot bone. These are all our keyframes for that. Now let's just start to show everything again. This button, you probably remember, displays your hidden channel. So if you have a hidden control, let's just hide this with H. So the foot IKR is showing in our list here. And if I disable this, it will be gone because it's not showing any hidden objects. And our broken channels here will show you any of our broken channels. We just have one broken channel because it has the underline here. I'll just expand this. And it has it's complaining about the property called show all, and that's just because I haven't run the script that goes with this this file. So if I run the script, that will repair itself. But it was good that it was broken, so I could show you what this little button does. Now you have some more filters in here. They are basically the same as this one here, although your summary channel is the one at the top. So let me just disable that, and now you don't see this little red summary at the top. So what does that do? Let me turn it back on. Now our summary channel shows you every frame where we actually have a keyframe. So here you probably can't see, oh yeah, we don't have a keyframe here on any of these channels, but if we scroll down, you'll see, aha, there is a keyframe on our I channel here. So anything that has a keyframe on it will show in your summary. And it works similar to the column select. So if I select this top summary key, it's going to select all of our keyframes here. And that works a very similar way to if we do the same thing on the master group control. So if I select our root here, it's selected all of our keyframes that belong to that group, which happens to be the root, but it hasn't selected anything else. Now, some of the other ways that you'll select things, sometimes you want to move a whole channel. So we can actually link select with the L, and that's going to select everything horizontally. So whatever you have selected. So let's say I want to select this one, and this one. Just going to select some arbitrary channels there, and then hit L. I have selected all of those keyframes there, and then I can actually move those individual channels if I want. Although when you're animating, it's always a good idea to try and keep everything in line. If you have something looking like this, let me just mess it up a little bit. This is a lot harder to animate because if I wanted to add some frames between here, it becomes difficult to control. So just as a little bit of a pro tip, try and aim to keep everything nice and neat like this because it's going to make it 100 times more simple to animate. So let's have a look at a few more things in the action editor. What I want to show you next is the actual name of our action. When we start animating our object, a default action gets created and it will just use the name of the object as well as it'll append the action name to the end of it. It's always a good idea to get into the habit of naming them. So I'm going to call this Cube Demo for now. It's always a good idea to name them because if you ever want to append it to a different file, you actually know which animation data that you're actually appending. So say if you had 3 different walk cycles and 4 different run cycles, you actually know which is which because you've actually named it correctly. It's always nice when you know what you're actually appending. So that is how we name it. Just click in there and rename it. And if we click on this one, you actually see this will show a list of all your actions that are in the file. Now, if we wanted to unlink this from our character, so at the moment you can see he's got some crazy animation on him. I've just borrowed it from the other file. If we wanted to unlink it, we can just hit this X here. Now it's important to note that this does not delete the data straight away, but you can see it's unlinked. So if I scrub, there's no animation happening. So what Blender will do, it will make this animation have 0 users, which means it's kind of orphaned. It's not attached to anything. So when you save the file, anything with 0 users will not be saved. So at the moment it is in our file, but if we just save this and reload, so let me just do that now to prove it. Let's go save and then reopen our file and then try and open our menu here. It is now gone permanently. If we didn't want that to happen, let me just reopen the old one and switch back to our action editor. If we didn't want that to happen, if we want it to be saved in the file, we can just hit this shield here. This creates a fake user. So now if I detach it, you can see, if we open up our menu here, you can see we've got a little F next to the name here. So what that means is even if it's not attached to anything, it will be saved in my file. So this button is kind of important for all of those things that you don't accidentally want to have deleted. Now, if you wanted to create a duplicate of the current action, you can just hit this copy button here, and that will create a copy of whatever it was at the time. You'll see it's appended the .001 to it, and we still have our fake user on the other one there. So what I'm going to do is, let's just call this cube copy. And you can spell cube properly. So I'm just going to create another object for the moment for the purpose of this demonstration. Let's create a monkey head. And now let's apply that cube copy to that there. You see both of these are sharing the same animation data as you've already learned from the last video. So now you can see that reflected in our little number here that says 2. This action has 2 users. If we wanted to make it a single copy, we can just click this one here, which is basically the same as creating a new action. There's actually 2 ways to create a new animation action. If you don't have any animation currently applied to your object or armature, you can just press the new button here and it will create a blank action for you to start animating with. But that really is a long way because you can actually just start animating and Blender will do this for you. So let me just unlink what I just did and start animating. I'll just move this here and set our first keyframe. So let's hit I. And now you'll see when I hover over it, it's going to update and it says Susan action. So any new animation that I create is going to be saved into this action here. So the main difference between the timeline and the Dopesheet / action editor is the way that these keyframes are displayed. In our action editors or our Dopesheet, we actually have different shaped keyframes, whereas they're all just diamonds in our timeline. So what does that mean? Well, basically each one of these shapes means our handles have a different setting. We can actually change our handles inside the any of our editors with the same hotkeys. So T to change the interpolation type, and then V to change our vector handle type. You can also see here we've actually got those shapes. So the diamond means we have a free type handles. The aligned is this kind of, it's meant to be a rhombus, but it's kind of like a diamond with the top and the bottom cut off. The vector is a square keyframe, and the automatic is a circle with a dot in the middle, and the auto clamped is just a circle. So that's what these ones here. So this is free, aligned, vector, automatic, and automatic clamped. So that is what the different shapes mean. Now what are these yellow bars or gray bars between it here? So this actually means that there is a hold between these channels here. So let me just prove that. I'll go to view and then show the sliders. So now we can see our sliders here. So you can see these values are changing between say 61 and 81. You can see them scrubbing there. Then we get to here to here. It's actually not changing at all between these two values. So that's what this means. Now there's one more color that can show in between our keyframes here when we use a different interpolation type. So if we use constant or linear, let's just change this to constant, you get a green line that connects them. So I'll connect these two, just select them and hit T and then make them linear. So basically this green line means that the interpolation between these keys is either linear or constant, whereas the interpolation between these ones is Bezier. Now let's do a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to change this one to, let's choose one of those options. Now you can see that that interpolation type is reflected with this green color. Now, if you're anything like me, you'll probably find this more distracting than actually helpful. So I like to turn this off in the view menu. It's called Show Handles and Interpolation. When you disable this, it will remove those green bars as well as the different shaped keyframes. It will just show you the familiar diamond shape, which I find much easier to look at. But that isn't the only thing we can show inside our dope sheets and action editors. We can also show the extremes of our curves. So if I go to the view menu here and I enable show curve extremes, we'll get these, it's pretty difficult to see, but you'll get these little arrows on our keyframes here. It's basically showing you which keyframes where the curves change direction. So I'll just kind of draw it, it'll make sense. So I have a curve going like that. We have a keyframe here, we have a keyframe here, and we have a keyframe here. It is changing direction at this keyframe. It is not changing direction at this keyframe, but it is also changing direction at this keyframe. This is an extreme at our top. So it will show you the keyframe with the arrow on the top. So whatever the shape of our keyframe is with the arrow on the top. This one, it's not changing direction, so it will give you whatever shape of the keyframe is with kind of like a double arrow saying it's continuing on in whatever direction it's traveling. And then our final one here will give you the keyframe, and let's just draw this as the vector shape, and it is saying that this is our peak at the bottom, our extreme low point. But this is another visual feature that I find clutters up the view. I believe it's enabled by default, but I have this setting disabled when I work. You can decide if it's something that you like or not. It is in the view menu here called Show Curve Extremes. All right, so there's one more thing that we can do with the display of our keyframes here, and that is we can actually change the color. If we go to the key menu, we have our keyframe type. We have this menu here. You can see the hotkey is R. So if I push R inside our editor here, you can see the same menu is going to pop up. And basically we can just change the color of our keyframes here. So these are actually animation terms. We've got a keyframe, or it should be a key pose, a breakdown, a moving hold, and an extreme, as well as a jitter. So these are all, as I said, animation terms. But if you'd like, you can actually make them refer to anything that you want. Now, there's no animators that I know that go to this length of actually selecting them, pressing R and changing whatever values that they are. Most people just leave them at the default keyframe setting, which is the yellow color. But you might find it useful to use these colors as a marker for certain points in your animation. So you might say, oh, this is my contact frame, for example, and then you might say, oh, I want to make this a special color so I remember where it is, and say, okay, that is the green frame there. And it's kind of a similar way to pressing M and setting a marker. So just Control M, this is my marker. That would be one way that I suggest that you use this feature. Now these colors are really just visual. They're not really treated differently to Blender's main animation system. So you really can assign whatever meaning that you want to them, whatever makes sense for the way that you work. However, it's worth mentioning that there is only one place where the color of your keyframes actually has a different meaning according to the software. And that's when you're working with Grease Pencil. There's actually an operator that is designed to delete all of your breakdown keys, and they are the blue color ones. So at the time of this recording, that is the only instance in the software where it will treat your keyframes differently according to the color. But as we're not working with Grease Pencil today, or at all for this course, that's not something you need to worry about for now. So there we have it, folks. That is an overview of the dope sheet in the action editors. So just in summary, I'd like to give you a little bit of a hint onto when you should use what. So basically, when you use the action editor, you're only going to be focused on one object's animation. So that is a good time to use the action editor. If you need to work on 2 characters or more, or different types of animations all at once, that is where you use the dope sheet. And that gives you access to all the animation that's in your file. So when should you use the timeline for animating? Well, basically you can use it to do blocking out, but really you're doing blind edits on one object because it's only going to show you one object at a time, just like an action editor. But you can't actually see the names of the channels that you're editing. So if you're working on something really similar and that's only on the location, rotation, scale of the object, then the timeline is fine. But if you're working on a whole character, for example, that has lots of different controls, it's always best to use the action editor. So that's all for now. I'll see you in the next video.